Hello, class, and welcome to the fourth of our series of fireside chats for our course on managing public organizations. As a reminder, the purpose of these discussions is to provide you with some practical context on specific topics we are covering through this course. This fireside chat will focus on strategic partnerships. I'm pleased to welcome two friends and colleagues who I've worked closely with over the last 5 years. Both have extensive experience in developing, managing, and leveraging strategic partnerships. I'm pleased to welcome them to our class and to this discussion. First, I'd like to introduce Laura King. Ms. King trained and worked as a registered nurse in Ontario, Canada, specializing in health promotion, public health, and professional education. She has 20 years of comprehensive experience at multiple levels of government, non-governmental organizations, and as a consultant. Her experience includes innovative initiatives leading and managing diverse risk factors across strategy, design, policy development, program design, planning, and implementation. She has a track record of delivering complex deliverables on time and on budget, supporting national, state, and community-based health promotion strategies and programs in the promotion of chronic disease prevention, as well as the development of professional education and best practices in community development. Laura currently serves as the American Heart Association's Director of Public Health. Welcome, Laura. Our second speaker today is John Clymer. John is the Executive Director of the National Forum for Heart Disease and Stroke Prevention, a nonprofit catalyst for public-private collaboration to reduce the prevalence of heart disease. A TEDMed thought leader, he previously led successful turnarounds of the Association of Directors of Health Promotion and Education, implementing a strategic focus and more than doubling its funding. He's also an adjunct assistant professor of health policy and management at the Loma Linda University School of Public Health. From 2001 to 2008, he was president of Partnership for Prevention. Under his leadership, Partnership for Prevention quadrupled its budget, won passage of landmark Medicare legislation, developed a health reform framework on which Barack Obama based his prevention and public health agenda, earned recognition as the Harvard Business Review's Breakthrough Ideas in 2006, and established the National Commission on Prevention Priorities. Thank you for joining us here today, John.
Thanks for having me.
And in full disclosure, these are both strategic partners that I work with at CDC on a regular basis. I want to make sure we have 100% transparency on that. So as I indicated, our discussion today will focus on strategic partnerships. So let's start that discussion with John. John, strategic partnerships can be an essential element to advancing policy priorities. What steps do you go through when evaluating whether to establish a strategic partnership with a public or a private sector organization?
Well, thanks again, Sal, for having me as part of this discussion. I really respect you and Laura, and so it's a privilege to be able to join you today and to join your class. So the answer is we ask a whole lot of questions, and we ask many of those questions about ourselves. So first, does the potential strategic partnership makes sense? In other words, is it likely to be a win-win or to generate a win-win? Could the partners reach our or their impact goals faster or make a bigger impact together than we could make alone? Second, do the prospective partners play nicely with one another? That's really important. Are the partners culturally compatible? You may have heard the axiom that culture eats strategy for lunch. It's true. Chemistry trumps expertise when you're building a team, and that axiom applies to collaborations as well as inside of organizations. And then you have to know whether the potential partnership makes financial sense. Are there sufficient resources to support a collaboration? Is there any financial risk to my organization? And if so, how much, and how does it compare to the potential benefit of a partnership? And then finally, is there any reputational risk to my organization to be involved with the partner or potential partners? For a non-governmental organization, usually our biggest asset, our most valuable asset, is our reputation. That's more important even than whatever is in the bank, more important than our expertise. It's our reputation. And so we need to be careful to protect it. So those are the different types of questions that we go through when we're thinking about entering into a strategic partnership.
So Laura, building off that, and thank you, John, for that insight. Generally speaking, when you form a strategic partnership, what type of benefits are you looking for from that relationship?
Sure. So, you know, like any relationship has to work for all. And so I think when I approach relationships, particularly when we work in public health, I mean, we can't do this work alone. And so first and foremost, you know, why do you want that engagement to occur? Who are you trying to approach, and what's in it for them? So you need to think about the person you're working with first, and why would they even want to come to the table, and then cultivate the relationship around that philosophy. Because it has to be a win-win, as John was saying. And when I, work with new staff or colleagues, I always say, you need to give a little to get a little. I mean, that's that whole reciprocity that needs to be considered. So my approach here is to really think, when I think about sort of the situation, or I undertake a situational analysis or a ready assessment, I've already started to consider what I just outlined, as well as sort of what am I trying to achieve in terms of whether it's the outcome being a policy or systems change, and how am I going to go about that. So I think about sort of the capacity of the individual or the organization that I want to approach. I start to think about what resources I want to leverage, and what could be leveraged, whether that be internal or external for the organization. I also think about what kind of change is actually needed, and at what level does that change need to take place. And that sort of helps to formulate the foundation of the conversation and the business case that I'm trying to create. And really sort of what's that overall receptivity for what I'm trying to achieve. And all this is in the lens, again, around that whole strategic partnership. It's who do I want to be at the table? Who do I want to approach? Who do I need to engage? And that sort of, it helps to inform the plan that needs to be built to get to the outcome that I'm trying to achieve. So when I think about sort of those motivating factors, I want to think about sort of who am I actually considering to address or want to collaborate with. I also think about, is there a coalition that's already in existence? Like, so if there's a coalition of players already together working on that issue, do I actually need to create a new coalition, or it would be better served for me to join what's existing already and build on the momentum that's underway? And then really thinking about sort of how those champions can be further engaged or more deeply engaged on the issue, and really build out again my process for how might they get a win-win out of this. I also think about sort of the authenticity of the leaders and the stakeholders that are engaged, and why they're at the table. So is there adequate representation of communities of color, maybe economic businesses that would be benefiting from the outcome I'm trying to achieve? Whether or not there's a good swath of healthcare providers or other key stakeholders that may benefit from being involved or have a sort of some skin in the game, so to speak. And that too helps me formulate a plan around how I want to build those partnerships and who might I want to approach around this. Lastly, one of the things that I think I have come away in the last more recent years is really the power of story, and my story around my why and how that may influence sort of those strategic partners. So when I think about sort of how to wrap around my why, or if I don't feel like my why is compelling enough, but I know the outcome will have benefit to all, then I may actually strategically recruit a volunteer or someone who has a really good story around what the impact of the issue that I'm trying to work on, would mean in their life, and allow them to be the spokesperson to help to kind of really build that compelling business case as part of my strategic partnership recruitment process. So those are some of the elements that I think about when I think about what building strategic partnerships and what I'm trying to achieve and how I go about it.
Laura, I couldn't agree with you more about the power of why, or the power of stories. And you just referred to your why a couple of times. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah. So, I mean, your why can be so different depending on the issue. I mean, it could be really, really.
You're talking about, sorry to interrupt, but I think you're talking about WHY rather than the why.
Yeah, like the figurative why. Like, so why do I care about this issue? Why does it matter? Why do I want somebody at the table working on an issue? And that might be because I'm really compelled on a personal level. Maybe I've had a family impact. You know, maybe I have someone in my family who's been impacted by, say, tobacco as an example, and I want to work on a tobacco control issue. Maybe it's flavors. Maybe I have. I'm watching the youth at the school who my kids go to that school, and e-cigarettes is becoming a really big issue, and so that is part of my story. And maybe instead it's really, if I don't feel like I personally have a compelling issue, but I know that I can know what the impact would be within a particular community, I might strategically recruit someone who I know has had an impact by that issue, and allow them to step forward and tell their story around why this would be critical for a policy change or systems change, because people really want to understand what's the difference is it going to make. If they're going to invest their time and energy, what's that impact going to be? And so finding someone to, whether it be yourself or someone else, to put forward and telling their why, their story, is really critical in terms of thinking about those strategic partners, especially in the recruitment phase, because if you want to have the right players to really, who are able to be empowered to make change, it takes a lot of different perspectives, different individuals, different skills and assets to make something happen.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that it's critical to have that when you're forming a strategic partnership. But depending on what you're looking to accomplish, if you're engaging, folks in the Hill or even folks in the executive branch, that why can also impact their motivation to advance a particular issue too.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how some folks, particularly on the Hill, will be interested in an issue that you would look at them at first blush and think they're never going to be interested in this type of thing. And then they have a personal connection to it, and that generates a motivation that no one could ever instill in them, outside, but they get involved in it because they have that level of interest in it. So it is important.
Yeah, and I would just add to that. I mean, I think what you're raising, Sal, is pretty critical because, as public health professionals, we oftentimes lean into stats, and figures and things like that as being compelling, and that should be the business case, and that's all you need. And in reality, a lot of times you lose individuals; they glaze over because it's just not what compels them. It's not sort of the heartstrings. And what you need to really think about is those levers, what's going on in their life, in their neighborhood, et cetera, that's going to pull on that heartstrings and actually get them committed. And that can be internally, or that can be external, like with folks on the Hill as an example.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is such a good and important point.
So, deciding to form a strategic partnership and then identifying what types of benefits you're looking for are two critical first pieces, but ultimately the success or failure of a strategic partnership really rests on your ability to manage an organization or a group of organizations towards a common goal. So John, I know you've been involved in a plethora of strategic partnerships in all of your roles over the years. So what types of things do you have to do to manage these relationships and ensure that you're generating success for all parties involved in the partnership?
Well, the first part of the answer, Sal, probably won't surprise anyone who's had any sort of relationship, even if it's just a personal relationship. The most important thing, I think, is to establish and maintain clear, honest, and frequent communications. We try to start with a shared vision of the goal and the objectives, the strategy, and each partner's role, and to be, again, clear about that. And this takes face-to-face discussions and agreements that are backed up by written documents. It's essential to commit the vision and the plan to writing to ensure that both or all of the parties, depending on how many there are on the same page from the outset, and that everybody has the same expectations. It's just good business to commit everything to writing. And then everybody needs to agree in advance on what data the partners will use to gauge our progress and to measure success, and then ensure that all the partners have the same timely data. Frequent communications to compare notes and to hold one another accountable for executing the plan, and very importantly, to make tactical changes as they're needed is very important. And then in addition to good communications between the partners, there needs to be good internal communications as well. When I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking of ensuring that all parts of my organization are aware of the partnership and that they know to bring ideas that may strengthen the collaboration, who to bring them to, and it also inoculates the organization and other partners against unintentional actions that could lessen or limit the collaboration success.
And John, I think when you're initially level setting with the group that you're interested in working with, and one group or a couple groups may not fully buy into the consensus of what this collaboration should be directed at. It's not a bad thing necessarily for those organizations to fall by the wayside, is it? I mean, you need to have full commitment from all the organizations engaged in the partnership in order for it to work. And if you don't, you're going to have troubles managing that process.
Sal, that is a really sound point. Yeah. Chemistry, the dynamics are very important. And if you have even one partner out of 5 or 6 who isn't fully bought in, isn't fully committed, then that will actually drag down the entire partnership. So you're making a good point. You need to have everyone with a shared commitment to success and to achieving and then sharing that success with each other. And that's something we haven't talked about before is credit. I think it's really important to share credit. And generally, there's one organization who will be charged. Some people refer to it as the backbone organization. It'll be charged with kind of handling the administration, moving the paper, ensuring that communications are happening, ensuring that data is being shared. And so that organization may need to step up and lead in some cases, but what can happen along with that is that organization can also try to step up and take credit or be more visible. And in the successful collaborations in which I've had some part, the better the credit for success is shared, the more equally it's shared, the more successful the partnership is.
Great. Thanks, John. Laura, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think John's point is really, really important because part of it is making sure people are on the same page. And as you said, Sal, earlier, sometimes that's not possible, and that's actually quite natural. in terms of group formation, and there is going to be that forming, storming, norming phase with any group dynamic. But it also comes back to the thoughtfulness around sort of the formation of the group, sort of forms follows function. And so sometimes when there is going to be a lack of alignment in terms of goals and or the ability to commit, sometimes the forum that you need to create is one where there's some task groups, you know, that are tackling certain objectives, so that everyone's time and effort is utilized to the maximum potential. You know, so there's one thing right now, I mean, particularly in public health, is there's so many coalitions and work groups that we're asked as organizations to sit on, and every time is precious. You know, we're all so busy. So people want to see that their time is being utilized to the best of its ability. And so thinking through sort of the roles and responsibilities of the partner that you're trying to recruit, the function that you want them to play, and then maximizing on that function, and that they're aware of why the specific skill or attribute that you're recruiting them for, so they're clear also on their purpose within the group. And so, you know, that's part of that early negotiation. Now, should there be new definitions of roles that need to occur ongoing, then that again goes back to John's earlier point, which is around frequent and regular and transparent communication, so that, you know, organizations oftentimes will sort of step into this type of work, you know, with, you know, just with trepidation, or perhaps even with, you know, minimal capacity at first. And then as they see that there is really good momentum, or that it's a high functioning group, they'll invest more and want to be at the table more. And so being mindful that things will shift over time, and the players may shift, and just modifying the goals, the way you leverage those individuals over time has to change and shift as well. So that's just something I think that I tend to keep very top of mind in terms of the evolution of these types of partnerships as well.
Excellent.
If I could add, Sal, a lot of the things that Laura just said ladder up to one word, which is respect. And one of the things that makes Laura King a great partner, and someone who I have a desire to collaborate with, is that she's very mindful, very respectful of her partners, and very mindful of all those things that she just said that contribute to a working relationship of mutual respect.
Yeah, and just building off that, you know, and I completely agree with your perspective on Laura. I think that's completely accurate. So it's a love fest for Laura a little bit, but I think the other thing to keep in mind too is that if you have an organization that, you know, rejects an offer to engage in a partnership, don't take that personally. You know, I would much rather have someone honest and transparent and say, look, we understand what you're trying to do, you know, your objectives are good, but there's just not a complete sync with what my organization is committed to working on this year or the next 4 years, or whatever the case may be. I would much rather have someone be 100% honest with me and not engage than engage and only do it, you know, 25%. So, you know, and thankfully neither one of you have only engaged 25%, and I appreciate that. But
it can be a not now. It could be a no, but not. It may actually behind the scenes be a not now. You know.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason to say that down the line you can't engage other organizations in a strategic partnership that extends over multiple years, for sure. But I prefer honesty from organizations over, you know, a choice to join and then not do anything. I would much rather have you be honest about your level of commitment and from the outset, and go from there, because I think it makes it better for everybody.
Couldn't agree more.
So Laura, we have a number of state and local employees in this class, primarily early to mid-career folks. So I know you've had some experience working with partners at the state and local level. Could you share what those experiences were and how those partners might differ from your efforts at the federal level, and whether you're able to coordinate efforts across federal, state, and local levels in your role at AHA?
Sure. So first of all, the types of sectors and players, are cross-cutting, whether you work national, state, local, or even sometimes hyper-local, which is a new term for probably some folks on this call. One of the things that I have always tried to be really mindful about strategic partnerships, especially when I'm working at state and local levels, is that as they are sort of deep saturated in executing their day-to-day activities, sometimes there's a disconnect from what's happening nationally. And so one of the niches that I feel like I try to bring to the table is sort of that connectivity, like how are things flowing down from the national landscape down to the state and local level to sort of help them have a more holistic vision of where their work fits and how it supports sort of these national strategies, because it's really easy to feel completely disconnected from that national approach. And so that's something I try to do in these efforts. I've had the privilege, as you mentioned, to work at all levels. And so the other piece that I try to really bring forward is understanding that there are oftentimes the issues or the challenges, the obstacles that are being faced at a local level are oftentimes felt at the national level. But again, there's this sort of disconnect in terms of as you move up and down, people sort of feel like they're in their own microcosm and they don't really get that this is beyond sort of their scope. And so trying to, again, sort of recognize that we're all in this broader objective together, and sort of the functions or the obstacles might seem different, or they might be a little bit different, but how do we kind of find those synergies to kind of make this all work? So that's another sort of just an observation of just now being in public health for 20 plus years and having worked at all levels, is trying to consider that. The approaches for building strategic partnerships really, in my mind, are they mirror regardless of what level you're working with. It's just around really being seated in the issues that particular level is faced with on that particular issue. So whether you're working on hypertension control challenges that you're trying to face, and how does that get impacted at a systems level within the state? How does that get impacted within the various systems and structures at a local level, or at national tables? They're slightly different, but understanding those nuances and being able to speak to those is really critical for reputation and how one would cultivate those strategic partnerships. I mentioned earlier about hyperlocal, and it's a term that I'm getting more rooted in terms of approaches, particularly from a public health perspective, and what that might mean in terms of policies and system changes. And it's really fascinating because it's been our experience in my work in the last few years, especially that some of the biggest impact that one can make right now is at the local level. And many, if I think back 10 years ago, the local level was almost, I want to say dismissed, but seen as like not as impactful as perhaps making changes at a state level or a national level. And I feel like that's completely been put on its head in the last 10 years or so, where people really recognize the great strides one can make at a local level, and how that supports the broader sort of goals and macro visions that state and federal agencies try to support. And so this hyper-local piece is even deeper. The approaches are more unique. It's really trying to understand those movers and shakers in your neighborhood and how they have the ability to have influence, and how they can bubble up even to municipal level changes, et cetera, or city level changes or county level changes. And so the tactics around trying to even go that deep are ones that public health is starting to sort of figure out, and I think we're going to see make even greater strides in the next 5 years around that hyper local engagement.
John, do you have any experiences at the local level to share?
Yeah, a few, and in part because we followed the path that Laura just outlined. If you look at the campaign buttons over my shoulders from my collection, some of them are from the first campaigns that I personally worked on, which were at the city council and the mayoral level. And I remember it was when I was a teenager, and I remember thinking then, boy, I can hardly wait to get to the big leagues, to get to like the federal level. And what I've learned over the years, having been involved in policy work on Capitol Hill and at the federal administration level, what I've learned is that, as Laura just said, you can accomplish so much more, so much faster at the local level. And I wish I'd learned that and appreciated that earlier in my career, but I get it now. And so the National Forum, the organization where I work, does a lot of work with mayors and with other local stakeholders. And there are examples of how we've scaled really high impact policy. When I say we, it's the collective we, not the National Forum here. We've been able to take policy from the local level to a much higher level where it has a huge impact. So quick example, think about trans fats. You probably know that, and you probably learned that trans fats are bad for you. Trans fats cause all kinds of health problems. And so trans fats bad, get them out of the food supply. Well, we just recently eradicated trans fats from the United States food supply. They're banned by the FDA. How did that come about? Well, it started with a local regulation. One city, in this case, it was New York City, banned trans fats, and then it grew from there. Another quick example, one in which Laura's organization has played a really valuable role, is in changing social norms, as well as the calories that kids consume. And it's healthy kids meals ordinances that have taken place. Now, what they do is they say, if you're a chain restaurant, you have a kids meal, the default beverage on it has to be one that's not sugar sweetened, water, skim milk, something like that. It can't be a soda or a sugary juice. And I think we all understand the reasons for that. It doesn't take the choice away. If I, as a parent, say, I want my kid to have a soda with her meal, then they'll serve it. But it makes the default beverage a healthy beverage. That started at the local level. Baltimore, City of Baltimore City Council passed it, the mayor signed it, then Rhode Island got on it, and within a year, the state of California did it. Now think about how big California is and how big the benefit is from a state policy there. So the work that we do at the local level can be really high impact there, and it can lead to a bigger impact on a broader stage.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, what you're talking about is an expansion of the policy incubator that I learned about 30 years ago and in my master's program. And back then we always kind of viewed, state government as the incubator for what the feds would do. But what I'm hearing is that there's an expansion of that definition to include localities now, and they're serving as a strong incubator for public policy moving forward, probably across all types of public policy at this point, even though our focus is public health. But and that's exciting, because that's a great new source of innovation that can be utilized at all levels of government.
Yep.
And you get to, and it allows the community to have buy-in to the process, and build their own. It's the innovation for, this is how it will work in my neighborhood, in my community, in my geographic area, which, there's obviously some foundational, sometimes benchmarks that we're trying to achieve that's sort of standardized across, regardless of where you live, work, or play. but then the operationalization of that can sometimes have some tweaks to it. And so I think that's where the local movement really has some real traction. And that's why I'm so excited about sort of this hyper-local piece, because as we start to think about sort of the power of decision makers, putting more power in the hands of, regular citizens, and then allowing them to inform how this might look like for their neighborhood, for their community, for, their, daily lives, is going to be really powerful for influencing elected officials moving forward.
Yep. And if I may, it goes a step beyond public officials. So this hyperlocal approach is certainly applicable in the private sector.
Yep.
There's a company called Pitney Bowes that eliminated desktop printers. And one reason why they did that was because they set up central print stations in their offices. So you had to get up from your desk and go pick something up off the printer. So one reason why they did that is because they wanted to give people a reason to get up and move periodically during the day to reduce sedentary behavior, which we know is harmful to one's health. And what they found when they did it was that not only did it increase people's physical activity, people were happier because it led to more interpersonal interaction. And third, their consumption of paper and toner ink went over the cliff. It plummeted because people actually thought, oh, do I need to print this off? And so there was a huge environmental benefit to it as well, and the fiscal benefit. So, these kinds of changes may appear to be small, and as Laura said, they're kind of hyper local, but if they're happening in lots of different places, there can be a really big multiplier effect.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, John. So in your role, how essential are strategic partnerships to advancing your organization's goals and objectives? And how would you characterize a successful partnership?
Sal, I'll answer the second question first. A successful strategic partnership is, as Laura said earlier, one that produces a win for both or all parties. It enables us to reach a goal or goals faster than we could on our own, and or to reach a goal faster than we could on our own. A successful partnership strengthens the reputation of each partner, and both or all partners come out of it financially whole or stronger at the end of the collaboration. And now for the first question, for an organization like the National Forum, that is an organization of organizations and whose role is to spark collaboration, strategic partnerships are bread and butter. They're essential. But from what I've observed, they're valuable to other types of organizations too. Non-governmental organizations can be valuable partners to governmental agencies because NGOs are more nimble. And we don't have the same constraints on us on dealing with policymakers or dealing with businesses that governmental agencies sometimes do. Community-based organizations can be valuable to other organizations who need but don't have reach into communities. And some partnerships open doors or give partners air cover. In the National Forum's case, as I mentioned earlier, we deal with mayors, and so we work with different umbrella organizations for mayors. For example, one called the Forum for Community Leaders, which is essentially the National Association of Republican Mayors and City Council members. And we also work with the African American Mayors Association. Well, because we have partnerships with those organizations, when we approach one of their members about becoming involved with us, they're predisposed to at least listen to us because we come with that sort of seal of approval. They know that we're a partner of an organization of which they're part. So that kind of reputational extension, it can be really helpful. And then there's one more point that I think we need to cover. And so far, I think we've been talking about formal partnerships, but there are also informal partnerships that can be very effective and valuable, and that require much smaller commitments from the partners. So one example I have in mind is a project of the National Forum called the Value and Access Collaboration. That's not the important part. What is important here is that we brought together a number of partners in different sectors and with different agendas who came together, coalesced behind a set of policy recommendations, which, if enacted, would enable people to have more access to care that's provided by pharmacists, to clinical services that pharmacists can provide. And there's really strong evidence that shows that this works. It's to the benefit of consumers, patients. It's to the benefit of society. It's cost effective, but there have been barriers to these policies. Well, we developed this consensus policy statement, and then we got 33 different organizations, including Laura's, to put their names on this consensus policy statement, or joint policy statement. And in 1 year's time, 18 states enacted policies recommended in the joint policy statement. And lobbyists, we're not lobbyists, but lobbyists who were working on those issues in state houses told us that by bringing this diverse set of stakeholders together and putting all of our names together behind these policy recommendations, it made a real difference in how policymakers viewed the agenda. Because instead of seeing it as something that, say, was of interest just to the pharmacist profession or the pharmacy industry, they now can see, oh, wow, patients support this, doctors and nurses support this, public health supports it, community interests support it. It's much broader than they may have originally recognized. Now, all it took was just some exchanges of emails asking people, hey, do you want to add your organization's imprimatur to this joint policy statement? And if they said yes, boom. And if they're a responsible organization, boom, it went on. So it didn't require a contract, it didn't require a formal agreement. It was a light lift for those partner organizations, but it's one that translated into measurable policy impact.
Excellent. So our wrap-up question for both of you, and I'll start with Laura, is do you have any final thoughts on the importance of strategic partnerships for my students in this class?
Yeah, sure. So my thought on this really builds on kind of what John was talking about, just before, and the importance of sort of the cultivating of a wide swath of relationships on an issue. So one of the ways we frame this at the AHA is just don't talk to your friends. and what I mean by that is that, we tend to want to work with organizations or individuals who we've worked with at different tables on different issues areas. And so we understand the organization. And so therefore, when you're thinking about sort of your recruitment list, you automatically just add them to the list without really thinking strategically about, well, what do they bring to the table, and would they really care about this issue as an organization? And so I think you really need to challenge yourself to be strategic. That's when we talk about strategic partners, it's strategic. So that's why I say don't just default to your friends and invite them to the table. If you're working on an issue that organization, just because that they'll probably say yes because they like you, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're the best organization for the issue that you're trying to pursue. So you need to start thinking out of the box and really expanding the reach of who you're bringing to the table and why, and building the the list of organizations who are invested in those issue areas, because it increases your credibility on the issue as well. So, and so that means stretching yourself. And part of that, I think, is also that sometimes we tend to, in this whole like defaulting to our friends kind of mentality, is that we do that because we know there's also competing factors or competing organizations. And so that will potentially cause friction, you know, and you want to avoid that. I would challenge you to think differently about that as well. As a rule of public health, I mean, part of we need to be purposeful about staying neutral when we kind of build out these partnerships. And when I say neutral, it's thinking through, again, the function of the individual or the organization and what they bring to the table, and how can that sort of be an asset to the coalition or the partnership that you're trying to build. And so that niche, defining that niche, there may be overlap, but there might actually be some clear-cut differences between organizations. And I'll give you this example. You know, working around COVID vaccinations, you know, in a county in Texas right now, and there is a vaccination organization that was seen as a competitor to the city's vaccination, you know, team and clinic. And so historically, they never worked together. And it wasn't until we sort of encouraged the two players to come to the table and think about this that we realized that, well, there was capacity challenges between one organization and the other. And we were able to sort of start to think through sort of sector, population, and geographic differences so that they're both achieving the same goal. COVID vaccinations, needles in arms, that's what we want, right? And that's what we're striving for in terms of the project. But nobody can do it all. And so how can we kind of maximize the capacity of each individual organization, carve off niches of target audiences, divide up the groups and the geography, think about access issues and the way that they deliver that service. And then we were able to kind of come together and really decrease the competition, and everybody has a lane to play. And that approach was refreshing and has actually continued to allow those two organizations who historically had years of being unable to sit and have productive conversations around their work now come together and start to think about it from that place and space. And that's where I think as public health, we need to continue to challenge our thinking and come from a place of neutrality around what's the greater good for the greater whole, and how do we make that work happen. And then the last comment I was just going to say here was also around, you know, it's been my experience that sometimes we come into communities and I'm talking about the global we, the public health we, the healthcare professionals, the workplace we, thinking that we know best, and communities know what they need. And we need to really listen to what they want, and us think about that feedback and how to build out a plan that is respectful, that helps to build buy-in for the change that we're trying to pursue. Another example, you know, of a project that I was working on where we were looking at passing a smoke-free policy in, you know, a particular county, and had been attempted once before and basically was not successful, because when went to city council was like, who from the community actually is here representing this policy? And there were no local residents or local community groups representing the interest. It was all people from outside the area. And so it didn't pass then. You know, here we are, fast forward a few years later, the approach was very different. We did a lot of community buy-in, a lot of community engagement, got little community groups to come over. People were able to speak to their testimonials, tell their why, and the policy passed without a problem. So just, you know, I want to say, like, sometimes, you know, it's the slowing down, you know, and that slowing down, we're so bound by our timelines and our goals, and this needs to be done in 1 year, and it's our performance measure, and our buckets are coming down to it. But sometimes by slowing down, thinking about the process, you'll actually yield results faster by slowing down. So just that's the other parting thought I would say to all of your students who are in the course today.
Thanks, Laura. I think those are great points for sure. John, do you have any final thoughts on the importance of strategic partnerships?
Yeah, and I endorse everything Laura just said, and that last point especially is really profound. So first, I want to say, even though we're gathered virtually today, it's an honor to be able to join you at Clayton State. So thanks for the opportunity. 3 very quick points. First, to reiterate what Laura just said, often, very often, an organization can accomplish its agenda or part of it faster by partnering, even though there may be times when it feels like the process is slower. You'll get farther faster with a team. Second, think creatively, as Laura said, about the partners. Sometimes thinking beyond the box, not just outside, but beyond the box, and bringing in different types of partners, including some with whom you haven't worked before, can be a game changer. So think about who has a stake, who might have a stake, who has influence in places you don't, or who has tentacles into the community that you don't, who has some kind of value to add that would be beneficial to the overall effort, and then set out to bring them in. And finally, respect. The most important thing in having a successful win-win collaboration or partnership is for the partners to treat each other respectfully in their business dealings, in the interpersonal dealings. Be honest, be open, be transparent, exchange information in a timely way, and do what Laura does, and always be thinking about what does my partner need, and how would this thing I'm contemplating, an action I'm contemplating, feel if I was the partner, and approach decisions and approach communications in that way. And I think that'll be a formula that will help you attain a lot of success through strategic partnerships.
Thanks, John. That was great. I appreciate both of you and your willingness to share your insights and experiences with my students at Clayton State.
I was just echoing Laura's insights.
I appreciate your time, and I know that your insights will be very useful to my students as we progress through this course. So thank you very much for your time and your willingness to engage.
Thank you so much for inviting us. It's been a pleasure, and happy to be a part of this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.